All right. Happy Wednesday, folks. We're going to go ahead. We'll give it a few more minutes. Y'all are the early birds, so we appreciate y'all. But we'll go ahead and put in the chat. Feel free. You can share your name, what city, what state you're in, and then what was your favorite subject in school? We're going from pre-K to college, so it could be like advanced calculus. It could be nap time,
Megan, it's not
whatever.
going to be advanced calculus for me, I'll tell you
No.
that.
All right, we've got psychology, humanities, art, English reading, writing, literature, algebra. Ooh, someone took flower arranging in college. I do not think that was offered at mine, but that is so cool. Recess, we're on the same page. Sociology, photojournalism, chat with recess. Yes. Art, religious studies, Spanish and counseling, humanities. Awesome.
Megan, we got lots of diverse interests here.
Yeah. No, this is awesome. MBA marketing,
hmm
music.
Oh, Beth is adding some details there. School of Agriculture. Beth, my wife and daughter do a flower every year. They grow flowers in the garden and then sell bouquets in the neighborhood.
Aw, sweet.
Yep.
Cool. Well, we've got a good group. Feel free, if you haven't chimed in yet, you can go ahead, share your name, where you're calling from, and what your favorite subject was in school in the chat. I'm Megan. I'm based in Orlando, Florida, over on the east side in Azalea Park. Um, Gosh, and I think I took a world geography class in college, and that was probably my favorite. And I'm joined today with Eric. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more, but Eric also with Community Works, and have the privilege of helping to lead the organization.
Awesome. And Eric, do you feel like are we good to get started?
I would be fine with that. People feel ready to go. Is everybody ready? Is everybody excited?
Yes, Liz is.
All right. Awesome, Liz. See lots of hands. Okay, good. Well, Megan, thanks for starting us off with that question. And like some others in the chat, I saw Chet and others were saying recess. In my early years, that would have been the answer. Middle school, high school, maybe I would have said lunch. So full circle, that's my son's answer now. So I'm living in that pain right now. But I do want to just open up with just saying maybe there's at least I don't know about you, but I often carry this question around with me. Um, what is it? Why is it that so many times when you have a community engagement initiative, even if it's well designed, we still don't get out of it what we think we are. We don't get maybe it's the usual suspects that show up. Maybe it's the louder voices. and then there's a silent majority that just seems disengaged, right? Or maybe we build the community engagement initiative, and um, and it feels like we put all this effort into it. The momentum, the participation just isn't there. It doesn't stick long term. It's not durable. And if you're like that, you're in you're in the right place. You're in a safe place today, because we're going to unpack and think about this. But let me say first, my name's Eric Smith, and I work with Community Works, and I bring to this 2 years, 2 decades. I'm sorry, not 2 years, 2 decades worth of experience in community and economic development. And over that time, I've gotten to had the privilege of working with local government leaders, civic leaders, neighborhood leaders, uh, folks in leading nonprofits, the whole gamut. Um, and now we get to do it across the country, and you can see some of the places we've impacted just this last year. But now we get to do that across the country through Community Works. So that brings us to the question: what is Community Works? If you're not familiar with us as per se, Community Works, we really are trying to build, and we are building. We are here for you, and we're here to provide you, to equip you with proven processes, field tested tools, and an amazing, powerful community or network that you can engage with, so that you feel like you can feel confident to move the needle on engagement from maybe that surface level engagement initiative into deep community building, where people are stepping up into leadership roles as residents and really moving the needle, so that you are unlocking that human and economic potential of your community, so that neighborhoods experience flourishing, which is what we all want. So, in other words, we're not here just to provide a training, but we want to be here as your partner, your friend in this movement, and to help you as we have done since 2008. So, this is not where my story started. And I want to share with you a little bit about that. I don't want to say what year it was. I'll give it away, but you know, almost 2 decades ago, I was working in Springfield, Ohio. This is my first major experience with community engagement. It was an initiative, kind of a hybrid engagement experience, initiative role, partly funded through community development block grant monies. And they said, "Hey, go out, our Southside neighborhoods, and we need increased engagement from residents. We need increased engagement from parents around the school, and then increased engagement from the students, all to make this a better place for our for the whole community, but definitely for the kids and the youth and the families." And so that I started where, like how I was trained. I don't know if this is something you've done as well. Comment in the chat if you have. But my first move was to organize an event. And so I did all the right things. I flyered the neighborhood, um, and I showed up the day of the event. And it's a bright, sunny summer day in the middle of Ohio. And 10 people show up, but 9 of those are kids who grab the hot dog and they're off to play. And so here I'm left with Miss Ida. Now, Miss Ida came out because she's curious. So she came because she's curious, but she stayed because this was a different kind of experience for her. And in fact, she stayed throughout the rest of the story. Uh, for years, we worked together. But what was different about that experience was I had to pivot, because it was just her and I. And I didn't want to walk through a formal agenda with just her, this whole thing that I built for this event. So instead, I sat down next to her and we enjoyed the shade of the shelter, right? And we chatted, and I asked questions, and I listened deeply, and I began to assess, what is it that she cares about, that Miss Ida cares about enough that she's willing to work on it. And that's what started this story of this, what blossomed into a whole multi-year story. But I went home that night after that event, and I was scratching my head, And I was asking myself, gosh, I did everything right, like they told me in school, you know, and yet, I get one person showing up out of it. What went wrong? But then I realized as I kept mulling that question over that there's another different question I should be asking. And that question is this. I mean, I started to ask myself, well, maybe it went right. Maybe the learned lesson to be learned here is that how we start makes it matters. And what happens if we start with questions and we start with learning and deep listening? What happens if we start with acknowledging there's gifts here and there's people here and there's assets and beautiful things that we can begin with? And what if we start there and then build the story from there? And so, eventually that story evolves, and we move from that to where at first I'm struggling to get even one person to show up, and stick with me through an event. To over the course of less than 3 years, we now have multiple events where 2,000 neighbors and residents are showing up. Um, and what is the events every year is what? It's neighbors are organizing a visioning dinner where we strategize, we set some direction, we celebrate successes. But there's all this churn, these events, this stuff happening. But that's not the most powerful part. The most powerful part is neighbors weren't just showing up to participate, but a subset were showing up to engage and lead. And then through that process, you have lots of projects, dozens of projects that come out of this around the things that neighbors care about. We had community gardens going up, safety initiatives, more connectivity, beautification projects, the whole gamut, all of which culminated in some interesting impacts. And so you had, for example, a 43% decrease in violent crime over the course of this initiative. You had an increase of 75% of parents engaging with the local school in that neighborhood. And those are just a couple of points to illustrate what was happening, that there was substance behind all this. And ultimately, that led to the kids at the local school. The total, like the grade average for that school in terms of annual yearly progress, which is the lead indicator, moved from a failing grade into a B grade by the end of the initiative, because they were surrounded by a more loving, caring, connected neighborhood. So that's just, one story, but it just reminds me that, how we start makes a big difference. And so that's what I'm excited about today. And by sharing with you some of the lessons learned, hard-won lessons learned, and some tools and things that will be, I think, helpful to you, that I learned the hard way through trial and error. But in your case, you starting off already well advanced to where I was at the start of the story, right? And so hopefully what we have for you today will help you move to the next level. And so on that point, I want to invite Megan to come up as the Community Works Director of Community Building Strategies, and to share kind of some of the foundational principles undergirding our work. So thank you, Megan, for all you do. And would you please share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say one of the big disclaimers I want to give at the beginning um, is kind of like what Eric shared, this approach of starting with the needs or what's wrong or the issues in a community is just kind of culturally baked into the way of how we solve problems. And so we don't want anyone to feel bad if that's the way that you've been approaching communities. I am a very proud social worker, but that's how I got my start is having folks come to me and then immediately handing them a needs assessment. And so we just want to give permission today. Like, that's the way that we approach problems, but we very much believe there's a better way. When we start with the gifts and when we see that everyone has something to learn, but that everyone also has something to offer. And so, just a bit of framework for why this approach makes a difference Some of you guys might be familiar with the vital conditions. This is a framework created by Rethink Health and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that's really geared towards talking about the social determinants of health. That outer circle are things that we are all probably working towards. Reliable transportation, humane housing, thriving natural world. And they found that those are what folks need to thrive, right? Not just to survive. But what's really important about this framework is at the center, belonging and civic muscle. What they really found is that what helps us get to that outer circle of everyone having the resources and relationships they need is that sense of belonging and having agency and an ability to make an impact where they live. And so this is important because what happens when we try to solve for or to address that outer circle without belonging in civic muscle, that's where we tend to institutionalize a lot of our community. So that's why when crime increases, we blame the police. When health is bad, we blame the hospital systems, right? We look at it as someone else's problem, not as something for us to take care of. And yes, David, 100% feel free to screenshot the slides. And we can also send them out at the end as well. And so this is one framework that helps us see, right, really how do we create that sense of belonging and start in a different way with communities. The other one, which many of you are also probably familiar with, is the IAP2 spectrum. So the International Association for Public Planners. And so this shows, right, moving from inform to empowerment, the different levels that we can engage with the community. And so we're not saying that all of our work needs to be empowering folks, because if you have to make a decision about whether or not to put in a stop sign at an intersection, that may not be something that residents can have a say in, right? So we want to be clear, and this tool is really helpful to provide clarity, right, with the decisions we're making. Where are we at on this spectrum? But what we know and what Eric's story demonstrated is that the more that we can move towards empowering, the more that we can activate residents to be the leaders in their community, that's when we see long-term, lasting positive change. But even in this model, the question becomes like, how do we create that empowerment? Right? What are the practical tools and resources that help residents step into those roles in our community? And so these are the two frameworks that we use really when talking about how do we help residents really step up as community builders and as the change agents in their community. And I know we're going to jump into talking about asset mapping, but it's really important to have some context, right, with where that idea comes from.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And I just noticed here, just looking at the chats, Caitlin says, yes, I identify with some of those early stories. And hey, if you're with Caitlin and myself, and we our first instinct was building the event, doing the needs assessment, you know, give us a yes in the chat as we move forward. But I do want to take a minute. I want to invite you. The thing that I'll talk about asset-based community development. This is a toolkit that you can use to get you started in not just engaging, but building belonging and civic muscle, which is the engine that's going to drive, the move toward sustained flourishing in your community and in your neighborhood. And so, just as we move into talking about asset-based community development, I just want you to imagine with me what would change if we started in a different place. You started by uncovering the gifts, the assets, the leaders, the energy that already exists in the neighborhood, in the community, in your town. What would happen if that was our first move? What changes when residents don't just show up with problems, but they start to show up with the spirit of how do we collaborate and work together to create that preferred future that we all want, right? Just imagine what that looks like when we're, but when residents are stepping up as leaders and stepping into a role of making change happen with us, right? Again, that's what asset-based community development was here designed to help us with. And I say design, it's really a description of what has always been happened. So let me go ahead and dig into that. Asset-based community development. The term was coined by Jody Kretzmann, the late Jody Kretzmann, the late John McKnight. And so they were both at Northwestern University at this point in time, and they got a grant. And over 4 years, they had the money to travel across the country. They went to 300 communities, had 3,000 learning conversations, did the research, compiled all the data, and said, what makes the difference between a community that's able to take a shock, maybe it's the loss of that factory or whatever that shock might be, um, and rebound and come out stronger on the other side versus a community that kind of languishes and gets stuck. And what they realized is the core difference is communities that are able to rebound and come out on top of whatever the situation is are ones that start by asking a different question. They start by asking, what is here that we have to work with and that we can do now, right? What are the assets that we have available to us that we can start working with despite the shock, despite despite the factory, despite the flood? What do we have to work with to start to take our way out and make a difference? So that's why they come up with the term asset-based community development. And they wrote this up, all this research, they put it all into a book. Those of us in the business, we call it the Green Book. And it's called Building Communities from the Inside Out, listed there. It's from 1994, I believe, if memory serves, but still really relevant today. And they have since gone on to build, they went on to build an institute called the ABCD Institute. I encourage you to go visit that website. So one of the key things then that they figured out with asset-based community development was the first move is asset mapping, right? So that's a term and a tool we're going to introduce to you. And the idea is pretty simple. It's just cataloging the gifts, the assets, the energy, the passions, the leaders, the cataloging all of that, and then starting to figure out together with neighbors and residents, okay, how can we harness that to create some forward momentum to achieve the preferred futures that we're looking for. So when I talk about cataloging the gifts and assets and those, the resources, the leaders and the energy and all those kinds of things, when I talk about cataloging it, one way you can catalog that is by these 6 asset categories or gift categories. So Megan, if you could move us forward. And again, you'll get these slides and you got some additional supports that Megan's going to send out over the next few weeks. But just to quickly go over this, one way you can create the categories that make it easy for people to engage and see the connection and start to build a preferred future are these 6 categories. I'm going to save the individual category for last because it's often the most overlooked and I want to dig the deepest into that. So, but let's start in with associations. Now, this is often sometimes overlooked as a strength that your community might have. A lot of times, our default is to think about who's got a brick and mortar building and, staff and those kinds of things. That's an institution. And our default is to go and work with the institutions. Those might be businesses, it might be agencies, it might be, it'll be any entity that's got paid staff, who is there to achieve a certain outcome. Versus an association will be a collection of individuals volunteering, and this might be it could be a yacht club, it could be a reading club, it could be something at a choir from a faith community, right? A choir group. It could be a group of folks who get together and practice music. Okay, so those associations can be a formal association like a neighborhood association, an HOA, but it could be an informal group where people are gathering around a common interest, common passion. And a lot of times we forget the power of associations in that they have membership. And so if you want to create change, you want to grow the number of people involved in making a new story possible. Engaging associations and their membership is a powerful way to do that. Okay, I've referenced it to institutions as well, but just think about as you drive through your community. Okay, where the agencies, the businesses, the organizations probably have a building, a structure that they exist in, um, and probably have staff, right? So that's what I mean by institution. But institutions are a real gift to your community as well. Just think about the economic implications of a school, for example, which is an institution, right? Well, yay, they have teachers. Teachers get paid. There's an economic benefit that an institution provides. Um, an institution like a church might be able to provide the community access, or the neighborhood, for example, access to a copier, space to meet, those kinds of things. So institutions bring a wealth of knowledge and resources and assets that are really helpful. So you want to document those as part of an asset mapping process. And then you want to think about the physical world, right? So you could drive around a neighborhood or your community or your town, and you've got the physical world, and that shows up in terms of the built environment, right? Streetscapes, buildings, houses, you know, telephone poles. I mean, all that stuff is part of the physical world. Any of that could be an asset, um, as well as your physical or your natural world, your natural capital, right? Where the open spaces where people can potentially gather, and bump into each other, right? Where you can have events. Then you have your local economy, which might include exchanges through just sort of like kind of a gift economy, and exchanging gifts. And your neighbor needs some salt, pinch of salt. They don't want to go to the grocery store just yet, right? All the way up to, when you see a dollar. This is the work of Bob Lupton. When a dollar exchanges hands 7 times in a neighborhood, that in and of itself is an economic engine to create an upward spiral, right, for the local economy. So it could be formal, it could be informal exchanges, but that's what I mean by economy. Documenting that, where the local businesses that exist there that we can support. And then, of course, culture and history, right? What are the stories of success that we can build on? What is it that's unique about that particular place? Is it a welcoming environment? That's something you can build on. Does it have a strong identity? That's something you could build on. So understanding the culture and the history is important. And then coming back to that idea of the individual. Okay, this is the gift of the one. You and I, we bring a unique set of gifts and aspirations to every story, to every scenario, to every encounter. And so does everybody else in the neighborhood or in the town or in the community. We all bring a wealth of experience. We all bring a wealth of knowledge. We all bring a wealth of resources, of aspirations. And so oftentimes, when you engage neighbors and residents to be a part of this asset mapping process, to learn about these categories, and then to start to document, the gifts and assets that exist here locally, then that sets up the table for you to start to create some interesting connections. Right? I want to tell a story, just one quick story of how the Arlen Tolliver Garden, Peace Garden, came to be. So going back to where I started, in this same story, after I'd met Miss Ida and this whole thing launched, eventually one of the people I met a couple years later was Brian Keith. And on your screen, he's got the gray shirt. So he's a neighbor, the resident in the neighborhood I'm working in. And he says, I want to do something, Eric. And it's like, well, what do you want to do? So over a period of time, it's like, well, I want to honor the patriarch of our family, Arlen Tolliver Sr., who was a person of peace in the community, a strong civic leader. So I want to do a peace garden in his memory and celebrate the ethos he brought to Springfield. Well, so what do you need? If you're going to do a garden, you need to have a plot of land. It just so happens the developer was like, you know what? This plot of land, I would love to not have to mow it. You can take this off my plate. because I don't want to do that anymore. In order to maintain it, you go for it. You have it. So you got a plot of land. Well, it takes labor, right? So, so what did that mean? That mean working with the some of the other institutions like Wittenberg University that's here. Guess what? They have a service requirement in order to graduate. So guess what? They provided some of the labor to get some of the early stuff started, as well as, of course, Keith and his family in the neighborhood, really kind of leading the charge. What's another story of weaving in something else? Well, guess what? You've got to have water. The city of Springfield uh, was under some expectation by the federal government to reduce stormwater going into the system because I was creating some issues with the infrastructure. So they were looking at this particular time for what? They were looking for ways to reduce stormwater issues. And so they were willing to spend some of the city budget to put up a water cistern and to collect water, rainwater, so that this place would have access to water. And then, so you started with the gift of Brian's imagination, his aspiration, his heart, what he wanted to see happen. You had the land came about. You had institutions playing a part. All of this collided at this one place, that turned what was one of the most kind of it was the place in the neighborhood that collected trash that was unkept, and it turned it into what you see here, which every Saturday is providing food for the community, and has benches, places to connect, collaborate, to meet up, to rest, places of beauty, places of growing stuff. So that's just one small example of what can happen when you help residents imagine a different future and create projects based on these different assets and how they can collide into one story, one project. So Megan, I think you've got some thoughts on, kind of where how do we start in doing asset mapping?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we do that, really quick, I'm gonna do some interaction in the chat. So be prepared. I'm gonna ask y'all to respond to a couple questions uh, because you're here at a webinar on asset mapping. A lot of people don't know what that is or may not be interested in the topic. So what I want to hear first is whether you're interested in this because you are a resident looking to do this in your neighborhood or if you're interested in helping others do this. So if you're doing this in your neighborhood, put a 1. If you're wanting to help other neighborhoods do this, put a 2 in the chat. Okay, it looks like we've got, I can't count this fast, but it looks like we have a pretty even split of folks who are both looking at doing this with your neighbors in your community and how do I help other neighborhoods start on this journey. And then the other question I've got, and feel free, you can respond in the chat. Why did you show up today? Do you have a specific question? Were you just hoping to learn more? Is this something you've tried before in your neighborhood and it didn't work out? If you had any specific question or curiosity, feel free just to put that in the chat because that will help us as we move forward, really try to tailor it to this group.
Yeah, that's good. Where to start? The solidarity economy, improved methods. Mhm. Wilmington, Ohio.
Someone's opposing a data center in Wilmington, Ohio.
Mhm. I'm not too far from you. In fact, my wife, her family goes back to Wilmington. Mhm. The community, Resident services coordinator, welcome, Kimberly. Mhm. very interesting.
Okay. Awesome. I know it's not very engaging just to watch me read your responses, so I apologize for that. But that is really helpful. One of the things uh, that my good friend Phil Hissom, who does this work locally, he has a church-based curriculum called Serving with Dignity, which I saw Emily on here. She just got trained to provide that. Uh, but one of the things he says a lot about asset-based community development is this work is simple but not easy. And so the reality is, as we're talking about what it looks like to do asset mapping, the actual activities can be pretty simple, right? If you're doing a neighborhood photo walk, if you're doing a plant walk, or doing interviews, right? Uh, a lot of that we already have the skills to do. It's just, do we have the tools, right? The resources, the framework to do it. Uh, but what happens and what I see most often is it's actually the work before, right? We even start partnering with the neighborhood before we start approaching with our neighbors. If we're not aware of where we are and what our role is in this process, that's where what ends up happening a lot is we can break trust. And so that's where we're going today. We are going to get very practical about how to asset map different resources and tools that you'll have access to. But we're probably going to spend a few minutes just talking about, uh, honestly, some self-reflection. That's what makes the difference between a successful asset map and an unsuccessful asset map. All right. And so there's three steps that I'm going to share with you that are helpful. And so the first one, to identify your role. Um, we did a webinar a couple months back, I mean, probably a year or so now back, with Diamond Harges. You may have heard his name. He's a roving listener over in Indiana and has spent time just going and talking to neighbors about what their gifts are and finding ways for them to connect. During that webinar, he made a statement that he thinks it's a sin to ask someone their gift and not to use it. And when he said that, something inside me cringed and kind of went, "Ooh, I think that might be too far." And I kind of got a bit hesitant. But then what happened is I had a couple opportunities come up right in my own neighborhood, in my own community, where someone had an idea. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I would love to join. Like, how can I help? I'm here to volunteer. I'm here to support it." Uh, and they said, "Yeah, I'll just get back to you." And then I never heard from them again. Uh, and what ended up happening for me personally is I don't know if the project just never happened. I don't know if it was something personal, if I didn't have the skills they were looking for, if I had offended them, right? I was left in a pretty uncertain state. And what that means is I'm not following up with them, right? I'm kind of creating distance in that relationship. And the same thing that happened there, I've seen happen in communities. A lot, especially a lot of low to moderate income communities or disinvested neighborhoods often have people come and start asset maps. It may be as a graduate project, maybe an idea, but they can't follow through on it. And when that happens, you start to break trust. And this may have been something, especially those of us in nonprofits or in local government, that may have been the story of a predecessor we had. And so that information is really important for us to know. But that's the first step is what is your role? For those of you that were ones who you are doing this in your neighborhood, this is a great way uh, to build trust with neighbors and to really build, going back to the vital conditions, that belonging and civic capacity to move forward. And so you've kind of got that insider role. I would highly encourage you, don't do this alone. Find other people in your neighborhood who are willing to go with you. But your role can really be to co-create this with residents. If you are someone who's coming from a nonprofit, local government, if you're a planner, think through what is your actual capacity. Is this something that you can facilitate a one-time session? Is this something you're able to offer ongoing support? And be aware of that capacity as you're approaching neighborhoods. Like I said, we don't want to start and to discover someone's gift and then to leave them hanging, having a gift that they were willing to offer and then not having a chance to use it. And so providing clear expectations for yourself and for the community about what your role will be is really helpful. One of the things I also mentioned as well, I believe this came from the Aspen Institute, did a lot of research in the past several years on trust. And one of the questions they used in neighborhoods was who's trusted here? Who's a neighbor? Who's a leader that you trust in the community? Um, that can be helpful because even if you as an individual have never interacted with a neighborhood, um, if your organization has broken trust in the past, you may not be the best person to lead this activity. So being able to find someone who's trusted in the community will be really helpful. So identifying your role. Are you a resident? Are you external, helping to facilitate the process? Are you someone who's cheerleading or even trying to find other resources and support for resident-driven asset mapping? And one of the things that came out in Eric's story, and that we talk about in asset-based community development, is there's typically three questions. What can residents do on their own? What can residents do with some support? And what can't residents do that an outside agency needs to do? Typically, that last question is the smallest. It's typically much more that there's a lot that residents can do by themselves. And so, what we're talking about for step two, kind of that pre work that helps us get started on the right path, is to know your goal. And so, this does not have to be specific to a specific action. It's actually really helpful if we can not have a predetermined, like specific action in mind. And so calling back as well to the spectrum of public participation that we saw. There is decision making and power in being able to decide what the priority is for a community. And so even as we're discovering the assets in a neighborhood, sometimes it can be towards a specific goal. Like I know if you're in a neighborhood that's gentrifying, or like was mentioned in the comments, if there's a data center, there can be a specific goal in mind, but sometimes it can be really helpful to have residents set that priority themselves. I was actually in an asset mapping session before in one of our local communities, and the facilitator was doing a really great job. But what ended up happening is she knew the community well enough to know that they had an issue with food scarcity. And so, as they were mapping their assets, as they were figuring out what are the physical gifts, the institutional gifts, she started stepping in and really wanting that group of residents to start a food pantry. Now, that wasn't where their gifts were leading them. They were actually going much more around social connection and getting to know neighbors. And so, being very clear about our goal within your organization, your own personal goal is helpful. And I will say, asset mapping is not a magic wand or a one-time process. One of the pitfalls we've seen as well is that a lot of times external organizations can have a very needs-based program where we're doing needs assessments, we're providing services, and then we do a single asset mapping session, assuming that that's enough to empower residents. So it's not a magic wand. We can't put it in a really needs or deficits based program and expect for that to be the one solution for residents to change. I will say, Eric and I have both worked with different nonprofits, different local governments to help them identify how do you align your programs with ABCD, and that's really effective. And in that context, asset mapping is really helpful. And so with asset mapping, like Eric was saying, is we're really trying to map what are the different gifts of the community. When we're doing this, right, our goal is to really help surface some of those hidden gifts. And that could be, like I said, towards a specific action item. A lot of times it's open to the community. One of the things that we're doing there very intentionally, and we'll talk about some different ideas that people have used to do asset mapping, but the ends don't justify the means in asset mapping. The way that we asset map is just as important as the actual outcome we get. So our goal, remember, is to increase belonging and civic capacity. Residents should be at the center driving this process with support from external agencies if helpful. But that's really, really important. If you're wanting to partner with and to support this in a new neighborhood, some of the things I look for, and something that Jay Groningen says a lot, is how many fingerprints are on an idea. If we have one person in a neighborhood who's very passionate about this, but can't really build connections or support for it, that might be a sign that we need to really help them focus more on getting to know residents before we jump in to an asset map. So really building connections and building trust. And so the last step, which is the step that we're all here to chat about, is to choose your path. And so once you know your role and once you know your goal, that helps you know, all right, what can my next step be in developing an asset map? And what we're going to do, because you're at this webinar, over the next 3 weeks, is we're going to send you a weekly email featuring what some of the gifts in ABCD, and then practical activities you can do to discover those gifts in your community. So we're going to give you those frameworks. So we'll have some of that for you. But typically what we see is they fall into three categories. The first is icebreakers and prompts. So you can see in that picture, I was recently out with the city of Plano and city of Allen, Texas, speaking about exactly this. One of the things we did at the table was having a poster sheet that people put sticky notes on. I've done this about gifts of the head, hands, heart. Some of my favorite is to ask if you had a magic wand and could make this the best community possible, what would look different? And so having those, if you're a planner, if you're a consultant, starting meetings that way can be a helpful first step for you to build trust with the community, and just to surface some of the assets without really committing yourself to a clear path forward. And so that's some of the popular ones we see out and about. This is helpful, especially when working with youth. So doing neighborhood photo walks, different scavenger hunts, really getting out into the community, doing interviews with residents, all of that is a really powerful way to start asset mapping, and is a really engaging way, especially to build relationships within a team, but also across generations. And then lastly, what we offer a lot and what we've seen work really well is workshops. I'll say the first two, the icebreakers and out and abouts, those are really good at surfacing the hidden gifts that we might not be seeing. They're not typically what's going to help us get to the next step of what do we do with these gifts. Having specific time, whether that's in your driveway, on your front porch, if it is through the neighborhood association, to really come together, look at our assets, and then say, okay, so what do we do now? Where is there momentum within the group in our community? That's what can be really helpful. And I'll say I haven't been 2 decades like Eric, but I've been working in asset-based community development for the last 5 years. And a lot of what got me started in this was just figuring it out on my own, right? Trying different activities with residents, trying to put workshops together that I had kind of put different activities and ideas together in. And while it was really helpful, one of the things that would have really gotten me a lot further faster was having some tools and resources that I could use. And so I will say, since you're here, one of the things that we'll be launching starting today is a new resource called our Discover the Gifts curriculum. And so we have used this in communities across the country. It's a 90-minute curriculum. Uh, it's offered either virtually online as a self-paced course, or you can be trained in it as a facilitator. And so this is a curriculum that we've used with countless communities across the country to help residents figure out what are their gifts and how do we want to move forward. It introduces them to ABCD through very interactive activities. And as we've been using it, one of the questions we've gotten from a lot of local leaders is, hey, would I be able to bring that back to my community? And we figured, yeah, you should be able to do that. So we are launching this resource today that you can get trained in, and it's proven, right? We've used this many times. And so it's something that will provide support, get you trained to use. And so if you're interested in really helping residents step into being leaders and being community builders in their community, we'll be launching this later today. All right. And Eric, did you have anything? I can go ahead and put that link in the chat for folks.
Yeah, I just it's no, I but it does strike me. I'm looking at who's here and some of the comments and feedback. For example, Caitlin's wondering about, we're trying to revamp or revitalize our old block club structure, right? I think that's an example where when if you where maybe being equipped with a particular proven methodology for helping your block connectors live into their power, so to speak, and to understand the basic principles, the power of connection, and asset mapping. This is exactly the reason why we've been asked to do this and why we're launching this today is exactly for that kind of a situation. So, um, I wonder, Megan, I just, we do, we do this work. Um, and I think one of the recent stories, I don't know, maybe you could share just briefly about Michigan City, Indiana, just as one story, one place that's used this curriculum um, to create something really inspiring.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've partnered with the Economic Development Corporation in Michigan City. And so they've now offered this the past several years. And one of the amazing things that happened last spring, uh, as we were talking about the gifts of our community, is someone had brought up an old program that used to be in Michigan City called Midnight Basketball. And so it was a program, I believe it ran through summer that had youth compete in basketball at midnight on Friday nights. And the reason that they had started it was because uh, there's a lot of crime, a lot of drug activity in the community. And residents knew, right, like we can't step in and try to solve that, but we can help walk alongside the youth and make sure that that's not the only option for their future. And so during this workshop, two women, Molly and Shalaya, were sitting at different tables and just immediately looked at each other when that idea was brought up. So starting last summer, they've restarted Midnight Basketball. It meets every Friday or for 8 Fridays during the summer, and has just been such a great time for them to share their love of basketball and to help engage and mentor youth. And so that's just one way of residents discovering their gifts that really led to lasting impact.
Yeah. No, thank you, Megan, for sharing. And folks, I just wish so much, going back to my origin story, as I was thinking about this, right, and listening to Megan and learning from all of you all this morning. But what would have mattered if I had before I did that first event, if I had something to give me the framing, if I had a community of supportive people that thought the same way, that I could learn from. I mean, if those things were in place, what would that how would that have accelerated my growth as somebody doing community engagement in the neighborhoods I was called to serve. So I just want to appreciate, Megan, you put together just some really great quality content and materials. And this is what people have been asking us for. So today's a really cool, a really special day for us to be able to put this out there to support the world with what we've found works. Um, and also just to say there, uh, you know, absolutely. We're also going to give you some practical tips in the following upcoming emails, and so you'll have what you need to get started, whether or not you have the curriculum. Um, but I do think that curriculum will help you to accelerate, and then if you go on the next step and get certified in it, so that you can facilitate it. Um, but if you have those pieces, I think that's going to really accelerate things. But absolutely, for sure, we're going to make sure you have what you need to get started with. So pay attention to your upcoming emails with practical tips and next steps to get started with this. And we'd love at the end of the day, share with us, let us know what are your midnight hoops stories, right, that are coming out of this work. And let's build this into a movement, a national movement that helps us to get re-engaged with our neighbors, um, because we know that that's the ultimate solution to the time that we're in. So I do want to say thank you all very much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Megan, as we shut this down, any last words for us?
I mean, I would just, I know a lot of y'all have been doing this work, and I'll say even I had like a neighborhood association meeting last night that I lead, and it's slow work. I mean, even with these tools and even with these frameworks, rebuilding connection and rebuilding trust takes time. And so, unfortunately, we don't have a magic wand and can't solve that for you overnight. But I would say if you're here, just keep going. Know that the good work that you're doing, it might be a lot of trial and error, but it is building something. Whether or not you see it, whether or not you recognize it now, the fact that you're here to connect with your neighbors and to really activate your community says a lot. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. All right, we won't keep you too much longer. Feel free, if you have any questions, stick around, but we'll get something in your inbox by the end of today with some of those resources and different ideas for you to use in your community. All right, thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody. We wish you the best in your engagement.